Bilo gdje I kud da pođem ja, u srcu je Croatia. Bilo gdje I kud da živim ja, u srcu je Hrvatska. Crven, bijeli, plavi, to je barjak naš, volimo ga mi.
Well, good evening, good day, hello, welcome back to another exciting virtual tour with myself, Chris Staudinger of Pretty Gritty Tours, brought to you today by the Foss Waterway Seaport and our various sponsors, including Columbia Bank, the Port of Tacoma, and Tacoma Creates. And I can tell you definitively that tonight's virtual experience has been one of the most challenging for me. Not because the content was like difficult to grasp, but the questions that got raised during this whole thing have truly stumped me. And tonight I'm going to ask for your help. It's interactive, and I'm hoping that you'll be able to help navigate the future of Tacoma and the Pacific Northwest. And yeah, those are lofty goals, but I think we can do it. So welcome. I'm glad you guys are all here. It's good to see you all. And as always, we are live broadcasting right now. So if you have questions along the way, please ask them. I'll do what I can to answer them. And then if you have questions later, be sure to drop them in the comments. We always go back through and do our best to be as informative as possible. Well, what are we talking about tonight? First and foremost, on its like face value, we are talking about the fact that there is a tremendous connection between the Croatian community and Tacoma. And a huge part of that is because so many Croatians in the late 1800s immigrated to Tacoma and then started lives here. We are also focusing on this gentleman tonight. This is Mike, and Mike is a Tacoma native, commercial fisherman, master shipwright, totally awesome, brilliant dude. And I had the opportunity to speak with him. And so some of his thoughts and answers are going to be shared with you guys tonight as well. But what's important is that he got brought in to create a boat. This boat that's pictured right here. And it is the crux of tonight. It is the most important element to this whole thing, way beyond the fact that it's just a Croatian boat built by a second generation Croatian Tacoman to represent the relationship that Croatia and Tacoma have. It's gonna get wild tonight. But beyond that, and this is something that I'll bring you in on, one of Mike's goals with this program and the thesis of his master program was kind of, how do you preserve something? His exact focus was on what effect tourism has on the preservation of heritage in a community and whether it's a help or hindrance. And that's something I constantly think about. So let's dive into this right now. So first, the credibility of your man tonight. This is Mike. He's currently running a nonprofit in Croatia called Maritima Educare, and it grew out of his work with a nonprofit here in Washington State. He, has worked, I'm trying to think, with all these different nonprofits. He is one of the original founding entities of the Foss Waterway Seaport building back in 1993, and has worked the majority of his life as a commercial fisherman right here in Commencement Bay and the Foss Waterway. Eventually, he went on to work with a variety of other programs, and then when he was 66, made the decision to move to Croatia, into the town where his father was from. So born into this Croatian immigrant family that had come to Tacoma, he reverse immigrated back and did so very, very much later in life. I believe he went the first time when he was in his early 20s to visit his dad's hometown and just had this instant connection to the place. And then decades later ended up returning to it. And I think that's really at the crux of it tonight. The purpose of the program was that in 2022, this boat, this Croatian-styled historic boat, was created here in the Pacific Northwest to act as a touchstone to the Croatian heritage in the area. And kind of where does that go from here is the linchpin of everything tonight. So this is Mike, and this is the boat. This is the brach, and it is a batana-style boat named the brach. The brach gets its name from the fact that so many of the Croatians that came to Tacoma came from this town, all along the Dalmatian coast, really, but in particular this one town. The batana itself is not a vessel that you would see in that part of Croatia. It's from a part of the northern Adriatic, close to this little gem of a town called Rovinj. And I've personally had the honor of going to Rovinj twice now, and it's, let me tell you, it's sexy. Whatever you have in your mind, make it sexier. If you have the opportunity to go to Rovinj, you totally should. That's unsolicited advice. Take it as you will. But if I give you any good advice tonight, let it be that. And on that note, here's a word from our sponsors.
I've been a commercial fisherman for 41 years. Truly is a magical place out there. I've been with Columbia Bank as long as this boat's been to sea. As a commercial fisherman, we have income pulses that are directly related to seasonal activities. If that propeller ain't turning, you're not earning. Columbia Bank tailored this loan to fit our business needs perfectly. They made me happy as a clam at high tide.
First of all, as happy as a clam at high tide has always been one of my favorite quotes from that commercial. But I think it's especially applicable today because it hits at the core of what we're talking about, which is how did this happen? So here's an early picture taken off the dock near Old Town Tacoma. And the vast majority of Croatian immigration that happened to Tacoma took place in the 1880s. And again, this was mostly from the Dalmatian coast, where you were seeing a lot of Croatians feeling a great deal of tension. This was during the Habsburg era, and without breaking into the geopolitical crisis of the Habsburgs and Ottomans, what you need to know is that this part of Croatia was now filled with people who, how do I say it? They didn't necessarily have a resource-rich life. They were on the front line of a big international conflict, and a lot of them were seen just as functional soldiers that prevented a human buffer in between conflict zones. And so to seek out a better life, the idea of coming to this area was really appealing. And so a lot of families did. And you get to see some incredible documentation of them. This is a picture of one of the early Croatian families here. And the Petric family, whose name I think we've talked about a lot because they're very involved in the waterway, has done a very good job of documenting sort of the Croatian heritage of the area. Also, the Jobkar Cabin Museum really focuses on early immigration to the area and the people that were coming to live in Old Town Tacoma. And what I like about them as a museum is that they've always focused on the very human elements of early Tacoma. So if you have the opportunity to check out the Jobkar Cabin Museum and look into a lot of their stories, they talk really heavily about Croatian influence in the area as well. But this is the site that early Croatians would have arrived to. This is a picture of Old Town Tacoma. I think this was in what, 1870, 1871, 1872, early in the days. And from the Jobkar site is this fantastic story of one of the first Croatian women arriving to the area. And her name was Jelika Mullen, and she was devastated. She arrived on December 25th, 1906, and she was so sad to see this area because it was all made out of wood. She had left Croatia, where it was these stone buildings in medieval Europe and cobblestone streets and just this like really well-established place, to a town where the wood of the area had been used to make streets, sidewalks, buildings, everything. All of early Tacoma was made out of wood. And that's pivotal to this whole story. The reason that Tacoma was such an appealing area for a lot of people was the old growth timber forests in this area here. In particular, those Douglas fir trees that were, sometimes upwards of 300 years old, were an incredible resource for a lot of people. And while the Puyallup tribe had been here with custodianship and stewardship of the land since time immemorial, with this influx of new people to the area, the timber passion took over, and everything was made out of wood. But for a people whose skill and pride was in building boats and ships, this was a really exciting place. So here's a picture from 1885. This is also down on the waterfront of Old Town Tacoma, of the Hatch Mill. And the Hatch Mill was an institution that was absolutely iconic to the development of Tacoma. And it allowed not just to build ships, but to also then load ships and send that timber around the world. And the quality of the timber from the Pacific Northwest was legendary around the world, especially back in Europe. A lot of the people that had left Europe came here to Tacoma, milled down trees, and then sent them back home to an area where there wasn't necessarily a ton of trees. And here's another picture of Old Town Tacoma and its development phases. But as Croatians were arriving here, they were writing back to their families being like, you're going to love it here. It looks a lot like home. And every time I say that to people, they're like, in what world, Chris, is that possibly true? But I would like to give you my best example. So here's a picture I took of Plitvice National Park in Croatia. Yes, jaw-droppingly beautiful. And this verdant land of waterfalls is something that is truly iconic to the Croatian area there. Here's another picture I took when I was in Croatia as well. So this gives you a frame of reference there. But here's a picture from not that far from where we are right now. And the lush, deeply etched topography of the coastline here in Puget Sound in particular was deeply appealing to early Croatians and reminded them a lot of home. Am I saying that Snoqualmie Falls is at the same level as Plitvice National Park? Well, I'm not saying that. So you see this huge influx come in now, where more and more Croatians are arriving to the area and establishing a real imprint on the area. The Croatian influence can't be understated. And especially when you look at early Tacoma's development, we're talking about a commercial fishing and timber town. And this is an amalgamation of a lot of maritime cultures that came to the area here. Germany, Finland, Croatia, Japan, China, a lot of small coastal communities that had been pushed out of their homes due to economic or political turmoil found a home here in Tacoma. And the ones that did were, in a lot of ways, those who saw something very similar to their home. When I was talking to Mike, he had this moment where he said that he had never been to Croatia before, but his dad was from there. And he was walking around in his early 20s and just felt this instant connection to the place. That he felt like something clicked deep inside him, where he knew that maybe there was a connection to the way that he felt about the world and the things that he ate and his desire to do things like boat building and commercial fishing. And he felt that tug back to a place. And it's something very similar to what I had when I went back to Norway with my family, and like in the ancestral homelands down just by Oslo. It was strange to see not only that connection, but also so many similarities to where I am right now. And that connection is something that is difficult to describe, but was kept alive by these early Croatian communities here because they were very insular in the beginning. There wasn't a huge, cross-pollination of cultures early on in Tacoma's history. And so the Croatian community stayed very tightly knit. And in a lot of ways still has, though not nearly to the extremes of the late 1800s. You can see the mark of that community in the area too, in places like this. So this is a church that still exists today, built by this community right here. So St. Joseph's Catholic Church, I don't know if you're familiar with it. It's over in East Tacoma, 602 South 34th Street, for those of you who care. And it was constructed in May of 1912. Here it is as it was being opened for the first time. What I love about this, you can just see in the bottom right-hand corner of the photograph too, the pile of bricks that they had for this church is still across the street as they're getting ready to open it up. And one of the things that made this church possible is that the Croatian community wanted their own, place of worship in the area here. So they started this Catholic church and they brought their traditions and values into it, but they also brought their skill. This church was built because there just happened to be a cadre of skilled Croatian laborers and masons in the area capable of building something like this. It still exists in the Tacoma community today. This is what it looks like right now. And it is a good example of how little things have changed. You know what I'm saying? Here's an example of how they have changed really dramatically. This is a picture from 1895, and it was a print commissioned to showcase commercial fishing in Commencement Bay back in the 1890s. And you can see all of these guys. The vast majority of them are commercial fishermen out of the Croatia area who found a new life here. And I forget if they were from Tacoma, Gig Harbor, or Stillicum, but any one of those had the same, level of involvement. Talking to Mike, it was fascinating because he was here at such a transitional time. He got to be a part of the massive commercial fishing industry that used to just dominate the shoreline of Tacoma, and then see it transition from that into more of what it is today. And here's what he has to say about it.
At some point, I left fishing and went into boat building, and that became my mainstay in Tacoma for quite a few years. And so I was there to witness, I guess, kind of the decline of the Croatian commercial fishing culture in Tacoma. I imagine it was going on before I was aware of it, but I was kind of there when it really ended.
We had some good questions here. There aren't a ton of old brick buildings in Washington. I mean, to be fair, there's not a ton of old buildings in Washington. Like, we're talking 1850s for, I believe the oldest building in Washington state from the period of like white activity is the granary building that's currently at Fort Nisqually, and I think that's 1852 if I'm not mistaken. There's not a ton of brick really, and that is something that came later on. But of course, when your single most abundant resource is wood, it makes sense that all of your earliest buildings would be built out of it. And in a lot of ways, that old growth timber was, better than brick. Even to this day, that wood can now be stronger than iron. It's absolutely extraordinary what that old growth timber is capable of. And when I was talking to Mike about it, that was a big thing that he was concerned about. Was not just that the disappearance of the fishing industry had taken place here, but that the age of abundance had changed. When the Croatian community arrived here, salmon were everywhere, and trees were the just dominant part of the landscape. And in less than 100 years, really the effect of commercial fishing and the forest industry could be felt universally. It was ubiquitous in the area. And so out of necessity, a lot of the industry out here changed. But what was lost with it was sort of the big conversation there. What traditions and heritage were just swept up with the necessity of changing the entire thing? So this is a big part of the whole conversation, to go from something like this being the main scene that you would see down on the waterfront there, to seeing all of the salmon species absolutely most prevalent in the area here, to what it is today, where one of the salmon that you'll see ever is the statue by Larry Anderson down in Old Town today. There's not the same shipbuilding culture and fishery here, but the skills for it were still around. And one of the places that you can still see that Croatian connection very much alive and well and vibrant is in one of the original structures down here. This is Slovenian American Benevolent Society's lodge. This was incorporated, the Slovenian Benevolent Society was incorporated, I believe, in 1901, and then shortly after the hall itself was constructed. And they did it, like so many things at the time, by supporting the community. There was a wealthy Croatian gentleman in the area named Andrew Betric, who lent, let's say, $3,000 to the Slovenian Society, and they built the lodge with that money and additional funds, and then ended up paying him back. And Andrew was a huge part of the Slovenian community. I'm trying to think if I've got the picture here. Here he is at his 100th birthday party in Slovenian Hall, still an icon for the area. And the lodge is so important for understanding this story. Not only is it a touchstone where you can look back and see the quality of the craftsmanship of the Croatian community, you can see its dominance in the area right down there in Old Town. It's off of 30th Street right now. But you get to look back and see how it was a little bit different. At the time, the Slovenian Benevolent Society was everything to the community. They were the social security net. You would pay your dues to the society, and then if anything happened to you, you fell ill, you couldn't work, you were injured, the Slovenian Society would then take care of you and your family. You would pay into it and you would get back. And they arranged and financed funerals in the area. They hosted weddings. They were a place where the community could gather and preserve their traditions and language and community, and be amongst like-minded individuals and create a community that truly took care of one another. So here's a picture of the hall in its glory days. Here's what it looks like right now, and it continues to operate as a major part of the Croatian community here in Tacoma, but is also branched beyond that. I operate tours in the Old Town area, and I feel like every weekend there is an event being hosted here at Slovenian Hall. Quinceañeras are a big one. I see a lot of quinceañeras. Wedding receptions is another huge one there. School auctions, like, it has become, like all of the Croatian community, the lines have bled out in Tacoma to areas where it's a little bit more difficult to define where one begins and the other ends. And there's something beautiful about that. I don't think there needs to be that rigid segmenting of the whole thing. But the idea of preserving a level of Croatian heritage in the area and its specific maritime connection got brought up for the Wooden Boat Festival out in Port Townsend. the Wooden Boat Festival had been working hard to ensure that all of the maritime traditions and cultures in the greater Puget Sound area had been represented. And I think it was in 2019, they had, I think I've even got a picture of it here, a Japanese boat. Here it is. This is a 23-foot long Shinano River boat that was built for the Wooden Boat Festival up in Port Townsend. And they really got a lot of positive reaction about that. And people came out of the woodwork, let's say, being like, I'm a part of the Japanese American community here, and getting to see this connection to it is really incredible. So the organizer for the Port Townsend Wooden Boat Festival wanted to have that Croatian influence represented there. Now, a little thing happened in 2020 and 2021, so there wasn't a festival for those 2 years. But in 2022, they came back strong. And the organizer at the time reached out to Mike, who had, in a bizarre twist of fate, already moved back to Croatia. Or I guess, I don't know if he moved, like, not necessarily back. He had left Tacoma, his home base, and moved to Croatia, the homeland of his heart. And they called him and they're like, hey, would you come back? And this is what he had to say about it.
I said, well, the best way to represent Croatia, I think, is to actually build a Croatian boat in America. So that's what I want to do. Let's try to make it happen. Well, the boat had to be small and it had to be simple. Okay, so the batana's design is really simple. And where I live in Croatia on the Dalmatian coast, kind of in the middle or southern part of the coast, the batana is not a familiar boat. Now, it is in the northern Adriatic. So that was kind of an issue a little bit amongst our members, saying, well, this boat doesn't really represent exactly where we are headquartered. And I had to admit it's true. However, it is a Croatian boat that has been recognized for some years as a historic boat worth preserving, that its design and its construction technique. And there's actually a batana museum in the town of Ravine, So you can Google Batana Museum. Okay. So I contacted them and they provided us with the historic documentation, the actual lines, the drawings of the boat and the history. And we did find out that the batana at one time was actually recorded in some writing back in like 1750 in the southern part of Dalmatia where we do our activities. So anyway, I said, look, I really think this is the boat. It's got historic significance. We have the actual documentation provided by the museum. So let's do this. So anyway, that was the decision. But then, okay, where do we go from there?
Okay, first of all, Slavonian, not Slovenian. Thank you. That is an appropriate correction. I apologize. I get that wrong all the time, and I have no excuses. So please, always let me know. Mike brought up the fact that they wanted to represent a Croatian boat in the area. And the difficulty was, what boat do you do? There wasn't necessarily something that was like, oh, this is the Croatian boat of Tacoma. They ended up going with the batana style because it was a historic craft of Croatian significance that could be verified. They had the drafts and the plans for it. And while it wasn't the type of boat that you would have seen in the South Adriatic, where his nonprofit, Maritima Educare, is currently located, it was representative of the Croatian community and was something that could have been created here in the Tacoma area. And I believe he said this a little more articulately than myself.
Now, that doesn't mean it was the batana. It was not necessarily that particular design, okay? But I would say similar. For me, I wanted an old design to represent what it might have been like for these early Croatian settlers, okay?
And it was a dual purpose one here. While the batana represents the boat building style of the Northern Adriatic, the name of this particular boat, the brač, is representative of the area where Mike is currently, where his family was from, and where the great deal of Croatians immigrating to this area would have come from. This is the island in question. It's just south of the town of Split, and is an area that is jaw-droppingly beautiful. This is actually from Savtat, but Savtat is not too far from where we're talking about either. So thus, the brač was conceptualized. And here it is today in the Foss Waterway Seaport Museum. This batana, I think, is 4.9 meters, if I remember the specifications of it. And one of the most fascinating parts of this is how it is rowed. It's not featured here, but it has this, horizontal, almost yard that comes across of it. And then they've got these two, essentially 14-foot long oars, I think is how long they are, that allow you to paddle it while standing up. It also has a sail system that this particular one has on it, and, allows you to maneuver a little bit more. But it's a flat-bottomed skiff there. And talking to Mike about it, he had a little bit more to say about the boat itself.
So the boat, it was trying to tell a story of maybe what it was like, when Croatians first came from Dalmatia to fish, and they had to build a boat, and they had the skills to build boats because they learned that in Croatia. And they came to a place that had beautiful virgin forests. So, I mean, it was like they were in paradise. Well, maybe not, but that's my notion. Unlimited amount of fish. They never thought the fish would run out, of course, They never thought the forests would run out, but of course both did. So so the boat was also kind of a resource story, a natural resource story. It's like, okay, this is what it was. This is kind of what it is now. And it's the same with the skill. It used to be a real common skill. Now it's seen as an art form for the wealthy or for the hobbyist, So change. And we wanted to show it both, not taking sides necessarily, but it just, let's look at the change, and let's just not talk about it, but let's just kind of show it. Let's try to show it in the creation of this wooden boat.
And thus they did. By this point, now the Port Townsend Wooden Boat Festival has acquired a third-generation commercial fisherman and master shipwright who has a deep Tacoma and Croatian connection. And the process goes into its final days. Mike ends up reaching out to an old friend of his, and they secure a space in Gig Harbor where the boat can actually be constructed. They now have a team of volunteers who are ready to represent this story in its truest form. He also taps his nonprofit in Croatia. So there is a Croatian volunteer force in the United States. Everything's coming together, but the decision on what do you make the boat out of gets floated down the Sound. And while it was debated for a little while for a variety of reasons, one, this had the potential to become an incredibly expensive project, but also they wanted to do something that was accurate and indicative of the time. Mike was adamant the entire time that this boat was being constructed that no glue would ever touch it. It was going to be the overwhelming majority hand tools only, traditional style, caulked the traditional way. All of this had to be as accurate as possible to the way that it would have been done in the 1880s and beyond, so that it could preserve not just the boat, but the skills. It was the connection to the craft that seemed most important in this whole thing. And so equally important was the material. And this is what he came up with.
Then I thought, okay, what am I going to build it out of? And I said, I want to use reclaimed lumber. I want to use old wood that might have been harvested, might have been part of the virgin forests that lined Gig Harbor in particular, at Tacoma, 125, 150 years ago. So I started looking for reclaimed timbers that came out of the warehouses in Tacoma and around the Pacific Northwest, old timbers of buildings that were demolished. But there are people that are reclaiming those and remilling them and then selling them. Well, it so happens that I had an acquaintance from years back when I was the teacher at Bates Vocational School. I was teaching boat building, and I met a man that was doing building demolition in Tacoma. He was tearing down these old warehouses. I'm not sure that they were on the waterfront at that time, but and I thought, well, maybe that's a source to get the lumber. So I contacted him. He remembered me, and he referred me to his manager in Port Townsend, where they have a facility of reclaiming old lumber, Douglas fir lumber. I had never met that manager before, but I contacted him and we got talking, and he wanted to know what I was going to build. And he said, yeah, I know Croatia. My parents used to take me there all the time when I was a kid. My father actually lived in Dubrovnik. Well, okay. So, magic, serendipity. He says, we will provide you with all the lumber, no cost.
What I love about this story is the interconnectivity of it. As soon as the proposal for this boat was sent across the ocean to Mike living in Croatia and summoned him back to the Pacific Northwest, the hidden fires of Croatian pride suddenly cropped up in this maritime community, and the skill and the timber and the time and the space were provided. It was never just conjuring something from nothing. It was blowing on the embers of a fire that seemed like it was dying. And suddenly there was a bright flame in the area, bringing back this maritime heritage to the shores of the Pacific Northwest. It took roughly 2 months. Mike, his associates, all working hard, ended up crafting this batana and then had it ready in time for the Wooden Boat Festival in Port Townsend, 22. These are what batanas look like in the area around Rovine. This is what the batana looked like at the time. And I know Mike mentioned it earlier, but the batana itself is an iconic piece of the Rovine heritage. This sexy little town right here does have a batana museum up in the area. And so as they were going through, they had really detailed schematics on how to make this particular boat and create something like this. It is designed to be a fishing boat, a traditional fishing boat for the region up there by Rovine, and was something that really represented the heart of a Croatian community. And again, because we love specificity here, it's not 100% indicative of the type of boat that the Brač Croatian community would have brought to Tacoma area, but it's a rad Croatian boat and it has deep historical ties, so it's fine. If you're into boat building, if I have any master shipwrights out there, Mike would like you all to know that it is a flat-bottomed skiff with a gentle rocker stem to stern, planked fore and aft, and traditionally caulked with cotton. So the side sections are straight and raked, which allow for easy construction, which I know was a concern when they were considering what boat to create in the area here, but allows this craft to have really substantial carrying capacity. And then again, is propelled by these two really long oars, which require sort of an outrigger to accommodate their usage. And to show you what that looks like, Maritima Educare created a video of the process as this boat was being put together, and I want to show it to you. But in particular, I really want you to pay attention to the fact that it shows that traditional cotton caulking process there.
Okay. No excuses now.
So you can see them really getting into the process here. That is that remilled old growth Douglas fir from the area. And it's been repurposed into planks and pieces that they needed for this vessel. And over the 2-month period, again, Mike was adamant that as much as possible, it needed to be traditional hand tools. They had some notable exceptions, mostly thaws for milling down the timber into the usable pieces. But it's done with a lot of blades and chisels. And here's that traditional cotton caulking to create the waterproof ability. Again, not all hand tools. And then steaming it into shape was something that Mike did with this hand steamer here. Here it is at the Wooden Boat Festival. And there's that outrigger system I was telling you about with those long paddles and how you navigate it. Yeah, the sail, gorgeous, right? Was, I believe, hand stitched up in Port Townsend by the Artful Sailor and is, of course, representative of the Croatian flag. So it's an absolutely stunning craft, lovingly built by this multicultural team of Croatians and Americans and Croatian Americans, and it's done in a record 2 months. And it is now time for Mike, to master shipbuilder in his 60s, to take this boat that he's created up to the Wooden Boat Festival.
And so the whole project came together over 2 months in the summer, and then we finally were able to display this boat at the annual Wooden Boat Festival in Port Townsend. Okay. Unfortunately, I got COVID right before the festival, and so I had to sit it out in an apartment. But two of our other members from Croatia, actually we had four Croatian members that came out to help build the boat, and then we're also there to interpret the boat in Port Townsend.
Yeah, that's right. COVID ruins everything. So after all of this time and effort, Mike unfortunately gets sick and is unable to attend the event itself. But it brings up the crux for me. It's now time to think about the future. And what does this boat mean? It comes together in this beautiful artwork of serendipity because there is this passion of the Croatian community that arises from the project, and the traditional craft of actually making this boat is shared. One of the things, I don't know if you caught it in the video, is that it was so multi-generational for the process itself. And so from young and old, all throughout, there were a lot of people actually involved in the skill that Mike was sharing. With the boat itself, which is jaw-droppingly beautiful, ends up going from this to this, out on display. The question had to be asked, well, what comes next? And that's exactly what I asked Mike.
I mean, I would love to run programs around the boat personally. I would like to come and run a Croatian heritage program around the boat. Okay, and I'd love to see something like that happen when the boat makes its grand appearance. You know, I mean, and I think thinking relatively short term is the best way to go, because then you read the audience, you read, you see if there's some excitement, and then you kind of see the opportunities. So, really big picture is, I mean, the big pictures are hard to make happen. I think the boat becomes, the brooch becomes a potential vehicle, object, historic object to develop stories around.
And that is it. What is the purpose of historic preservation? For me personally, I endeavor in this craft because I think it is essential for people to have their connection to a place awoken, to feel a sense of identity and ownership in the place that they live and interact with. And one of the things that was really evident going back through the history of the Croatian community here is that sense of connection to Croatia and to Tacoma and the Croatian community in Tacoma provided a lot of opportunities for people to take care of one another. The benevolent society represented by the building today is a great, litmus test for the whole thing. There was a structure that by itself is beautiful, created with the intention of housing a community and providing them opportunities to interact with one another and come together and take care of each other. It still exists today, and it has grown beyond its original purpose to now a whole variety of cultures and traditions and backgrounds are welcomed into that space with the same intention as the Croatian community originally had there. I think the boat is similar. And I agree with Mike that it needs to be used. I don't know necessarily what that looks like. If there's races involved or whatever, one of the things that he brought up was that the design of the craft makes it difficult because of the traditional aspects of the sailing rig and the way that it's built. It's not necessarily a boat that you would use to really engage youth out on the water, but it represented a long tradition in the area. And the truth for me has to be somewhere in the middle. And I think it's the mission that the seaport is always questing towards is, where is the line between preserving heritage and engaging with the present? And how do you take a traditional craft or skill and maintain its integrity, but still allow it to be relevant? One of the best examples I've seen in a long time is this boat. And taking something with traditional lines and schematics, building it with reclaimed lumber that is older than this area itself in some ways, and doing it now is amazing. So I hope that we can take that forward and go forth with that mantra. If you have the opportunity to pop into the Foss Waterway Seaport, I think it's a great time to examine a lot of the boats. One of the things that I love about that space is that the artifacts, the boats that they have on display there are core samples of this area. They are small craft that were hand built by people in this area and are representative of the Tacoma story. So get out there, keep on exploring, and find the line between connecting with your heritage and making new traditions. If we can do that, maybe the future will be bright. So thank you, guys. And if you have questions, let me know. Thank you, Juliet. There's a strong sentiment to be said for, like, throw them out there, let them figure it out. But honestly, if you guys have questions, comments, please let me know. If you have any interest in maritime connection to the area here or what's coming up next, let us know. The Seaport is always really receptive for what comes next. And at the end of the day, it is my mission and theirs to make sure that people have a sincere connection to this area. So thank you all for joining us tonight, and I will see you soon. Get on out there. Keep on exploring.